Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Share the adventures of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barley.
Welcome to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Mike Roberts and Bill Barley with you for the next half hour. And you know, I've had people say to me, have you guys not done that story about gold in the Shuswap? And today we just might do that story.
Well, actually, Mike, I've never looked for it. I should have many years ago, because I had the original story from an individual whom I trusted very, very much. His name was Rupert Hagen. He was a mining engineer, and he was in this old town. This is Rossland in probably about 1915. This is from Red Mountain looking down on Rossland. Rossland's really booming at that time. It was the golden city of the West, and Rupert Hagen was a mining engineer who lived in that town and told me the story just about 50 years ago exactly, Mike.
Now compare that image of a bustling town in its heyday with this pastoral little photograph
of Salmon Arm. This is Salmon Arm, probably around 1910, 1914, and this is about time this story took place. Rupert Hagen knew it very well. I'll elaborate on that after, because it's quite a long story, rather convoluted, and some of my memories are absolutely almost letter perfect. Some are not. A couple, when you go back half a century, Mike, you tend to forget names. I've forgotten the names, although I know it was Lowland Scott.
Okay, we're going to do that today, and this is a little bit of, I mean, if you went back to when you were 9 years of age and some really vivid recollections, those are the kind that Bill's got, and we'll talk to him about them right after this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. We're talking about a lost gold mine in the Shuswap, but what's really neat, and I can empathize with you in this because I have vivid recollections of my life as a kid around about 10 years old. You're 10 years old in Rossland.
Yeah, I'm 10 years old, or maybe 9, Mike, in Rossland. And Rossland at that time, and we mentioned this 8 years ago on the program, but we should mention it again, called the Golden City, one of the most famous mining towns in the entire West, including the United States. And the key to that town and the prosperity of that town was Red Mountain. And here's an example of some of the mines on Red Mountain in its heyday. And this gives you a fascinating insight. Hundreds of millions of dollars in gold came out of Red Mountain. It boomed for almost 2 decades, Mike. Now here's one of the mines in Red Mountain. This is the Center Star. Remember it very, very well when I was a kid.
Did you just wander around the whole time?
Mike, we wandered all through those mines. We went through the tunnels, and we were careful. If we didn't have a carbide lamp, we'd reach with a stick and make sure there wasn't a break off into a level down below, or we'd use a stone to throw it ahead of us. And
you thought you were careful. Your mother, if she'd known you were there, she would have been terrified.
Oh, of course. Mother and father would have been absolutely out of their minds. And so the Center Star was great. The War Eagle was another great mine, and of course the king of them all was the Leroy. And, you know, but it was Depression years of the end of the Depression, early 1940s, come through those 1930s. So like most other kids in Rossland, I had a job. And my job was delivering the Vancouver province. And you didn't make much. You made literally, or I think if I remember correctly, about 50 cents a month. That was your profit on the Vancouver province in 1940 or 1941. And the interesting thing about it, I liked the town. My route was probably 2.5 to 3 miles around, which is quite a bit for a kid of 8 or 9 years old, especially in the winter, because the snows in the winter, Mike, they went up to 6 feet. I mean, Rossland was a snow belt. And so I remember walking up Columbia Avenue. Here's Columbia Avenue, and the old courthouse is still there, Mike. Remember it very, very well. But beyond that was the Anglican Church, and up top of the hill was the Roman Catholic Church. So that was part of my route. I walked up here and knew a lot of people, knew everybody by name, and they had people who'd give me sometimes a nickel or something at Christmas. It was great. And so I walked around and went around the town and covered virtually all of the town. And then I came down behind, and this is an interesting shot. Doesn't show you the house I stopped at. It shows you the fire hall. Well, the house I stopped at, Mike, is right behind the fire hall. And it's a little house owned by Rupert Hagen, whom we mentioned in the introduction. And he was a mining engineer, and he was a fascinating guy, absolutely fascinating. And I remember going in there, probably 40 or 41, which is over 50 years ago, and he and his wife was Lois Hagen, they knew my parents well. They used to invite me in because they knew it was the end of my route, and they would have a glass of milk and a couple of cookies for me. And he also was a very, very nice guy, and he didn't have any, he had 2 children of his own, didn't have any sons, and so I was kind of a surrogate son. And he would invite me into this room, and we'd sit there, the 3 of us, and he'd bring out a stamp collection, marvelous stamp collection. He was a Newfoundlander, and he had been left to him was some of the best and finest Newfoundland stamps I'd ever seen in my life. He was a philatelist, and he knew I was interested in philately, and I had started my own stamp collection at 8 years old, as usual. You know, collecting runs in the family. And he also knew that I was fascinated by mining. Well, I'd been brought up in one of the greatest mining towns in the Old West, so I was naturally fascinated, and the ghost towns were all around, and he used to bring out samples of ore, and then one day, and I remember it absolutely perfectly, Mike, the sun is streaming into that little room, and the stamp collection's on the north side of the room. I remember that, and the desk is there. I think it was a roll-top desk, and there's some more samples, and he said, I think I'll tell you a story. He said, this is the only story that I think where this treasure still exists.
And your ears perked up, and the electric memory has been imprinted on you to this very moment.
And most of the details, Mike, I can remember. I can't remember every detail. When you're going back more than half a century, I thought I would at the time. I didn't take notes. I'm 8 or 9 years old, right?
And we'll take that up from there and talk about the lost gold in the Shuswap when we come back from this break. Don't go away. Back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Bill's on his second cookie, glass of milk, in Rupert Hagen's house in Rossland, and he's riveted you with the theory that this is the only gold treasure story, I believe.
Yeah, and he had been all over the province. So this was quite important. So I concentrated on what he was saying. Remember most of the details, not all. And so he said, you know, Bill, he said, I was in the Salmon Arm area doing some work, some assessments, some years ago. And I think it was between 1915 and 1919. Seems to me he mentioned war years, World War I, when he was there. And he was probably concentrating on that north of Salmon Arm. There's quite a bit of hard rock occurrences here and there and showings. So anyway, he went downtown in Salmon Arm. Now here's what Salmon Arm looks like at this time, Mike. It's a pastoral town. There are a lot of orchards. It's generally a farming community, and the main street is coming along. The main street's quite interesting.
There's Mercantile. There's the McGuire Mercantile store there.
That's right. And
down at the end, that's the big one way at the end is the hotel.
That's right, and this is probably where he met 2 brothers. Now the 2 brothers, all I remember, I cannot remember specifically their names. I can remember, Mike, that they did have a Lowland Scots name, something like Jameson, but maybe not Jameson. Yeah. And they were 2 bachelors. I remember him saying that they were not married. So probably they were trappers or part-time prospectors, but I'm not sure. And he probably mentioned that detail again. But what he did mention was this, and he said he was introduced to them in the hotel. They sat down on, you know, probably over a beer or so, and discussed mining generally, and they came to like and trust Rupert Hagen. So they brought out some gold, which was absolutely riveting. It really was. It was spectacular gold, coarser than the gold I'm showing you here. Now this gold is heavy gold, it's coarse gold, it's lead gold. That means you're close to the source. And they had nuggets up to 1 and 2 ounces, which is 10 times as much or larger than any specific piece of gold in this tin.
Now, Rupert must have said, you've got yourself some fine-looking ore there, sir.
Yeah, well, Rupert understood placer mining. He wasn't a placer mining engineer, but he understood placer mining, and they related the story. And the story, they only gave him certain details, because they were still mining that piece of ground, and no one knew where it was, Mike. That's the interesting thing.
They were kind of cagey characters, weren't they?
Yeah,
I mean,
they were.
And they would only mine what they needed.
That's right. Now, the interesting thing, and I remember he told me this specifically, he said whenever they wanted a trip to Victoria or Vancouver, they would go up to the mine for a couple of days, their hidden mine. I call it the Brothers Lost Mine. And they would take out as much gold as they needed for the trip and maybe a little extra as well. They also went on extended journeys into the United States and other parts of the world. And all of it was paid for by the gold out of this lost placer mine. Now that's very interesting. And they only extracted enough from their so-called hidden bank that they needed. That's all. And we do know, and Rupert knew at the time, there were a number of people in Salmon Arm who were trying to track them. And that's very, very fascinating because, frankly, it's some parts of that country around Salmon Arm, it's easy to follow people. North of Salmon Arm it isn't. South of Salmon Arm it is, Mike.
The country's open, and
that's right.
So it would be easy to track them if they went south to their mine.
That's right.
But then if you were tracking them, they could see you, wouldn't they? I mean, it works both ways.
Precisely, precisely. And the west is easy to track. But the east and the north, not easy to track.
Now let's then contemplate the east then. That would take you up towards Sycamoose, the Shuswap River, out into the Monashees.
Sure.
And how long did it take them to get this gold when they needed it? How long were they ever gone?
Well, he said only a few days. And I believe the maximum was up to a week. So it was somewhere between 3 days and 7 days.
Now, 1919, how fast? What are they traveling? Are they riding horses?
No,
are they going
no,
on lake boats, or what are they doing?
I would think they wouldn't ride a horse, too easy to track. They would be walking. And they can't go too far. So they could have gone east into that country beyond Salmon Arm into the Shuswap River country. There's a little bit of gold in the Shuswap River. I remember mining it 20, 30 odd years ago, actually 40, almost 40 years ago.
Losing track of time.
There isn't much there, and it isn't coarse gold that they were talking about and the gold that they showed Rupert Hagen. So I think you pretty well have to cross out that country around the Shuswap. So now you look at south. And south, well, here's a photograph of the country that it looks like in the Salmon River Valley. Unfortunately, there isn't much due south of Salmon Arm.
Okay.
Not many hard rock occurrences. There are a little bit, but not much. Certainly very little placer gold. So that strikes that out. Now you can go west, Mike. You can go west into the Kamloops area. Well, one of the most famous creeks there, of course, is Tranquille Creek. But that had been mined by the Chinese. It had been mined by the whites. So it was essentially exhausted. They got a little bit of gold out of Tranquille Creek in the 1930s, but not a lot of gold out of Tranquille Creek. Then you can go up the North Thompson, get into creeks like Louis Creek. There's some gold in Louis Creek. And that's a possibility. But the gold in Louis Creek tends to be finer gold.
That looks to be a long way to go in a few days. I mean, you've got to go all the way down to the confluence of the South and North Thompson and then all the way up to Louis Creek.
Unless they were working the upper reaches of Louis Creek, and that cuts down towards the Shuswap River itself.
So now we're talking north.
Yeah.
So where did they go north? How did they get there? Did they go up the Adams River, up in Adams Lake?
Well, they crossed a little bridge which was there at the time, or go over by boat. I don't know if the bridge was there or not. And but the interesting area that I would concentrate on is Scotch Creek. Now, the records indicate that Scotch Creek was discovered in 1886. I don't think that's true. I think that Scotch Creek was discovered by the Chinese prior to that, from information or research I've done on that, much prior to 1886 or the 1880s. They were probably working that creek in the 1860s. And Scotch Creek yielded some very, very coarse gold. But it was essentially mined out by the turn of the century.
Okay.
So they
that wouldn't be where they were getting their coarse gold.
That's right. So I think, and this photograph gives you a photograph of Salmon Arm, I think they went north into the country, which is kind of hazy here in this particular photograph, but that's the country they went into. I think it was almost due north of Salmon Arm. I think it was a high ancient channel, probably a tertiary run, and I think it's either on the upper reaches, maybe well above Scotch Creek. It might be 400 or 500 feet above Scotch Creek. When you look over the rest of the province, Mike, you see high runs in the Caribou and high runs in Atlin and high runs in all the famous gold areas, and some of those high runs are 500 and 600 and 700, sometimes 1,000 feet above the creek itself. So I think if I were interested in following this up and doing a little more research on it, trying to use the British Columbia directories, and the directories are important because Salmon Arm was a town of a few hundred people in 1915 to 1919. I would try to find the name of two bachelor brothers there. It won't say that in the directories, but it would give the same names. I would look for a Lowland Scots name very definitely and see what their occupation was. I think it was either trapper or perhaps part-time prospectors. And I think I would concentrate on that area around the Adams Lake, around Scotch Creek, maybe the upper part of Louis Creek, but that's the general area, which you can see in this map here, Mike, that I would concentrate on. Now, that's a lot of ground to cover, but I think the rewards would be really quite fascinating. I think the mine's still there. I think remnants of it are still there. It was never staked. It was never recorded. Rupert did say that, and I know that that's a fact. It was never staked, never recorded.
So these two brothers would just wander off to their little hidden mine, get enough gold to let them pursue their activities. They sounded like quite an eclectic bunch. I mean, they would go on journeys around the world on the Brent, and they would go down to Victoria. They lived a sort of a dilettante life, didn't they?
They had nothing to worry about. Evidently, no one else. They were quite convinced, Mike, that no one else would find their mine. So it wasn't on Scotch Creek. It was beyond, but probably close to Scotch Creek.
You know, there still could conceivably be a lot of gold in this country, hidden away in those upper reaches. And why did you call it a tertiary channel? Now, is that important for us to know? I mean, when you're looking at a piece of ground, does a tertiary channel look different than a primary channel?
Well, yeah, it does. A tertiary channel is a preglacial channel. And that means that you'd have to look for the same signs. You'd look for oxidized gravel or reddish-type gravel. You'd look for cemented gravel, which is very important. You'd look for ironstone. You'd look for well, small samples of gold. You might look for different changes in the color of the gravel. There are lots of things. There are about 30 indicators you would look for, Mike.
So when you pursue a story like this, you've already given us the indication, the BC directory, names of potential like this. Is there any value to getting geologic maps at this stage of the game? Because geologic maps have been created for all of British Columbia by some amazing geologists over the years.
Sure they have, Mike, but the geological maps by either the federal government, the provincial government, generally pinpoint the areas that have hard rock occurrences. That is lode gold, lode silver, lode copper occurrences. And you will find there are some lode mines beyond in that Adams River country and in the Adams Lake country. And so we know it's mineralized up there, and there have been for literally for decades. But it doesn't really pinpoint a lot of the placer occurrences like it does the hard rock occurrences.
And some of those placer occurrences can be some distance from where the lode is. Glaciers took them that way, water took it that way, and that'll be where they're deposited, so you can't look for the two places at the same time.
No, not necessarily at all, Mike.
This is a darn fine cup of tea you've been making here. Got a couple of things to take a look at, a couple of artifacts to look at. For some reason, you're fascinated by something which is not, I mean, it looks like brass to me, but why would you find these to be of any particular interest?
Well, I'll tell you why, because I visited an old friend in Rossland, a guy called Gary Clenzo. He had them hanging on his wall, and there were about 5 or 10 of them. And this is really from a stagecoach in early Rossland. And one is the tag that the person who sent his baggage down the trail kept in his pocket, and that was on the baggage itself.
Now this one, it says Roseland on it. Is that just a spelling mistake that the poor old Leroy Express made?
For sure it is. I mean, the Leroy was famous. So the guy sent probably a message to this outfit in Chicago, said, this is Rossland, BC, and they'd never heard of Rossland, but they heard of Roseland, so they decided to put Roseland in there instead.
What, pray tell, is this? Some sort of spring operated?
Yeah, just for holding letters.
Just for holding letters?
Yeah.
Well, look, isn't that an elegant little piece of memorabilia?
Yeah, that's from Rossland, too.
Yeah. Any secret to that tin cup that you showed me? I mean, wouldn't this just be your modern version of your tin cup?
Well, yeah, but minor stuff. I mean, the miners used tin, and they used enamelware and so on. So this is simply a miner's cup, out of a mining town as well.
Now, you kind of like, now take yourself back to the time when you were that 10-year-old kid. Was this your cannon, or was this somebody else's cannon?
Actually, that was one of my cannons, a little later, actually, when I started collecting seriously. And that's from Britain's Limited. And at that time, this cannon cost, I believe, 32 cents. Now it's worth about $50. So it's gone up 100 times as much in the ensuing years.
What's this little brass wheel here for?
Yeah, that's for making the elevation of the cannon itself go up or down. And it isn't working as well as it should be, but they were really quite well made. You couldn't play with those anymore because they're made of lead.
Okay. Got a couple of wooden boxes here too, and one of them is just conveniently sort of half filled with gold. That's just sort of a conversation piece, is it?
Yeah, that originally had a gold scales in it, so it's most appropriate, Mike, that you have a little bit of gold in it as well.
Look at now, here's one of these tokens. You're big on tokens, and this has been shot through with what looks like the letter H in it, or split.
Yeah, that's the Hoffman House, and the Hoffman House was a very famous hotel in Rossland. And
would they regularly take silver pieces? This is a 2.5. What is this?
yeah, that's German. That's German silver, what they call German silver. That's 12.5 cents. It means that you had a drink, but you couldn't get a drink for 12.5 cents. You had 2 of those, which meant you had to spend a little more money before you got another token.
Oh, so they would, if you spent money at the hotel, they'd
Sure.
give you tokens.
They'd give you tokens.
Now this looks like aluminum or some kind of strange.
Yeah.
And this is Ed Watson. He would get, this would be a token you'd
Sure.
get from Ed Watson.
Yeah, Ed Watson had a bar there as well.
Queen Cigar Store, Columbia Avenue.
Yeah, well known through the Kootenays and Boundary Country. The Queen's Company was a big company, had cigar stores all through Nelson, Rossland, Caslow.
And
Greenwood.
you're a fan of spoons too. This one looks like it's been gold washed.
Yeah, it has been gold washed actually. And that's rather interesting because it's almost a pouring mold, and that's most appropriate for Rossland. So that came from Rossland. Very, very tough to get, Mike. Anytime you get an old souvenir spoon from Rossland, from Sandon, from Phoenix, really quite valuable as far as collectors are concerned.
Hey, I would consider this box to be a treasure of sorts.
Yeah, I like gold scales boxes. So
Yeah.
I picked it up in my travels.
There you go. We've got some printed material here too. Anything special about these particular, what are these, share certificates?
Yeah, those are stock certificates, and they're quite valuable. And I mean, when I say relatively valuable, probably worth around $25 or $30 each. And if you found 100, it's a fairly good find. Especially if they're dated 1890s. This came out of Rossland. The date is almost always on them. And it's better if they're signed. And this one is signed, and I have probably 100 in my collection altogether, many of them from Rossland.
Listen, even from the point of view of being works of the engraver's art,
Sure.
these are phenomenal.
Yeah, they are.
And they show aspects of the mine business. They
Yeah.
show the countries almost as well as a photograph would.
Yeah, sure. Sure they do. It was a come-on procedure. I mean, some of the stock certificates are absolutely spectacular, and most of the ground was moose pasture. It wasn't good. In fact, most of the ground in Rossland, you'll see Rossland covered with, in the early maps of Rossland, actually covered with claims, Mike, most of them worthless.
And
But
this
a
one-
handful were spectacular.
And this one has, I mean, if the other ones didn't attract you to it, this has got kind of embossed in gold the fact that this
Sure.
is a $1 certificate.
Sure.
Was this actually worth anything? Was the Monarch Gold Mining Company worth anything?
Monarch didn't get off the ground, if I remember correctly. Those were found originally in the Bank of Montreal in Rossland, and one of the ex-bank managers let me have a number of those.
Well, and now they certainly serve the purpose.
Sure.
I mean, they certainly take you back to those days.
Oh, sure they do.
All right. How much gold came out of Rossland? How much you were saying? How
Well,
many-
the figure now, it varies. In those days, millions and millions of dollars. Now I think the figure is around 140 million. It would probably be more than that, depending upon the fluctuating price of gold.
Okay, and I'll always remember the story you just told about Hagen and the gold that he thinks probably exists in the Shuswap north of Salmon Arm. Join us next time for more Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Bye-bye.